I think it's very, very important that everybody sees organizations as forces for good. For those who don't believe in organizations, I believe organizations are the only way that we are going to solve our collective challenges. So, how do we bring humanity back into our organizations to be this force field for service, for good?
Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. We're here to facilitate inspiring dialogues about the nature of consciousness across disciplines, communities, and practitioners, all with a holistic perspective.
From energy healing to somatic therapies, from neuroscience to meditation, we believe the most interesting things happen at the boundaries of disciplines.
I'm Christabel.
And I'm Keith.
Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Field Dynamics podcast. Today we are joined by Catherine Bell. Catherine is a successful entrepreneur, business leader, and best-selling business author. She founded the Awaken company based on her best-selling book of the same name, which focuses on helping organizations create healthy corporate cultures through awakening the self, relationships, and team dynamics. Her book, The Awakened Company, was awarded the Nautilus Book Award in Business and Leadership and listed in 8 of the best leadership books of 2015. The book aims to awaken the fire within organizations with passion, purpose, and playfulness. Catherine has been published in Fortune, Harvard Business Review, Profit, Conscious Company Magazine, Women of Influence, and has written for the UN. She's worked around the globe, from the UK to Cuba, with everyone from Fortune 500 companies to serial entrepreneurs. She has an MBA from Smith School of Business at Queen's University, a sociology degree from Western University, and is certified in the Enneagram. As CEO of the Awakened Company, Catherine now consults all over the world, teaching people and organizations the Awakened Company process. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an honor and a privilege to be with both of you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you also to everybody who is listening.
Let's get to the basics here. Can you share the inspiration behind writing your book, The Awakened Company? What motivated you to explore conscious business practices in this way?
So picture this. I'm sitting in a dimly lit cafe in New York City, and it was like lightning struck my head. And the lightning said, you are to write a book called The Awakened Company. And at this time, it was about 2008, I was starting a business, and the business was called Blue Era. And it was called Blue Era because when you look at the planet, it's blue. And we felt that the whole next generation is going to be about taking care of the earth. So we called it Blue Era. Anyway, so I started writing this book, and this book on really, it was a recruiting book because I was in executive search. And I shared it with my partners, and my partners were like, Kath, this is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And then I realized what the universe was asking for, what the field was asking for, was a book on the corporate culture that we were creating at Blue Era. Like, we were doing mindfulness in 2008. We were doing unlimited vacation at that time too, and doing things radically differently in terms of how do you build healthy cultures and healthy organizations and healthy leadership. And I'm a mom, and I was juggling so much, and I wanted to provide kind of an example, a new example of how to be in organization. And at the same time, I really wanted Eckhart Tolle's publisher to publish the book because I felt it represented that their work really represented the consciousness that's needed in organizations. So knocked on Constance's door a number of times, and she said, yes, we'll publish this book. And at the same time, a real community was evolving around Awaken Company, like Otto Scharmer from MIT, Rose Marcario, who was then the CEO of Patagonia, got behind it. Dr. Julian Barling, who's one of the top business leadership researchers in the world, got behind it. And then I'm like, you know what? The universe is asking for me to really help organizations create healthy culture. So that's the genesis, is through building. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I can't help. One of my core values is to create and be created. I can't help but to create and build. So I'm like, I'm to help other people build their organizations. And in many respects, it's through the mistakes that I've made, so that other leaders don't make the same mistakes. And I believe everybody's a leader.
Let's define this term awakened company, right? And I'm just going to flip to the inverse, right? So what's an unawakened company, or what kind of practices and experiences are employees and leadership having in such companies? And where is it that you're flipping the script? And why is this so important in today's business landscape?
Well, so let me start with the definition first. An awakened or an awakening. I use the term awakened because it's punchier than awakening organization. It really is awakening because I see it as an ongoing process. I don't see it as something that has passed. So an awakening organization is one that works to solve either a human or planetary challenge, and in so doing does not cause harm intentionally to humans or the planet. When we look at now what's happening in organizations, we look at the data on loneliness, the data on people not feeling like they belong, the engagement. Engagement is up and down, but overall, we've got a lot to do, because I believe organizations are the way we're going to solve the world's greatest challenges. And it is only by organizing differently that we will actually be able to address these challenges. So when we walk into organizations and it feels like a dead forest instead of an alive, vibrant, emerging forest, that's when we know we're kind of in that either asleep place or awake place. And the invitation is to bring, our awakened selves to work. But often people don't even know why they're working, who they work for. I'll say to a CEO, so what's your vision? They won't know. They won't be able to clearly articulate it more times than not. And then I go around the table, ask the CFO, CTO the same question, and they don't know. So unless we have a clear reason why in our organizations, how can we possibly motivate people? Very challenging. We help companies create strategies with soul. And I've changed my thinking around the term strategy, because strategy is based on war. And I don't think businesses should be at war with anything. I think businesses are a powerful, healthy force for good, for solving challenges, not to be at war. Same with the term ally. Ally is used in war. These war metaphors have got to go. So I'm looking at very deliberately changing some of my own language as I've changed with the Awakened organization or Awakened company to be more peaceful. And that is really, when peace isn't present in organizations, when creativity, innovation, belonging, meaning, that means we are in an asleep place.
What would you say are like key principles or pillars that distinguish an awakened company then? What are the things put in motion into that company culture?
So I'd love for everybody listening to think about three things. And if the answer is no to one of those three boxes, then the invitation is to bring it in. And let's talk about each one of these three pillars. So we need to awaken leadership. Well, what does that really mean? People need to understand what transformational leadership is. It's one of the most well-researched leadership models in the world, and it has everything to do with elevating the other. So first, how do we awaken ourselves? And we know the highest performing leaders are those that are self-aware. And yet only 10 to 15% of people are actually self-aware, according to HBR. Super interesting is the business research, the wisdom traditions, and my practical experience. They all point in the same direction. They aren't mutually exclusive. They're all very, very, very consistent. So as leaders, and I believe everybody's a leader, here's one reason why. Business research. We put one group in a room, we call them followers. We put another group of people in another room, we call them leaders. There's a mock accident. Who behaved in a helpful manner? It was those that were labeled as leaders. Those that were labeled as followers did nothing. So the labels we stick on ourselves, back to the self-awareness, matter. And then, okay, so that's awakening ourselves. People need personal aims. And I'm sure you work with people on creating personal aim, personal intention, super, super important. Mindfulness, super, super important. Using tools such as the Enneagram to understand how can we be more present and not operate from default. So that's one pillar, self-awakening. Next pillar, relationships. People rate the worst time of their day as their time with their bosses. So how do we change that? Because leaders don't really want to be boss holes. They really don't. So how do we cultivate healthy relationships? And one small thing we can do is like positively notice each other. Like right now, I'm noticing that the two of you are very present with me and very present with my words and really intently listening. And so just to positively notice and reaffirm the other so that we catch people in the act of awesome is such a small little thing everybody can do. I was at an event and recently, and there were university presidents speaking, and one of the university presidents was asked, "What's the most powerful thing you've done in your career?" And her response was, "I wrote 5 thank you notes every night." So it's how do we build these little micro practices of gratitude, of love into what we're doing, and to have relationships that are mindful and spacious and loving. And then when we come to the awakened organizations, that's culture, which is like, I love culture on our group. I see the group as having like a field of its own. And so the core pillars are energize, sustain, and regenerate. And when I speak of energize, do organizations have vision? Do they have metrics? Because what gets managed gets measured, right? Like when we're measuring stuff, people will work towards those measurements. And we know that companies that focus 2/3 on corporate culture, 1/3 on financial results, that's where alchemy is. Yet most leaders don't know that. So vision, metrics, do we celebrate? So those are under the energize pillar. And then we have the sustaining pillar, which is, do we know what our values are in organizations? Do we know our connections? Do we have proper structure? And then the last pillar is regenerate, and that's innovation, creativity, and peacefulness, and allowing more space in our organizations to create, and this is probably a decade overdue, but for the first time in a decade, I'm doing something called the Awaken company certification to teach leaders how to actually do this. And it is so overdue. And yet I feel like the time is now for it. So I'm really excited to be teaching people that and how to bring this leadership approach to life.
This is incredibly ambitious, Catherine. And I'm sharing this from a perspective of someone who spent the sort of, let's say, one half of my life afoot in heavy London corporate culture, everything from consultancy firms through to creative companies in fashion, PR, marketing, the art world. And I struck upon that phrase you mentioned at the beginning, bring your awakened self to work. And I thought, wow, I mean, from my perspective then, historically, good luck. Because, I'm working in spaces at that time where, the idea of developing culture is maybe, if you're lucky, someone throwing a yoga class in on a Friday lunchtime, right, for a team, which half the corporation, might just turn their face away from, and then just the women go, or et cetera, et cetera. And I'm thinking about the idea of leadership being self-aware. And I work with some incredible individuals, but that would be not something that I would say necessarily was top of their priority list, let alone, possibilities when I think about their stress levels and their availability, during working hours and the pressures that they're under. So I'm fascinated by what you're sharing. I celebrate what you're sharing. It's long, long overdue. How are you finding this pressure point, going into, you mentioned in the bio there, Fortune 500 companies, right down to these solo entrepreneurs. How is this going? What's the resistance factor, and what's the reality here on the ground for you?
Oh, what a beautiful question. So the companies that I founded, they were rated as best workplaces and also extraordinarily profitable. And I think that there's an illusion in our society about this do, but then we get caught in this hamster wheel of doing when we allow being to enter, we are far more creative. We're actually far more productive. And what, just so you know, just a hack for you personally, is that I have found when I provide business research and also research on mindfulness, when I say, like, let's take a breath. Like tomorrow, I'm going into a strategy session with a team, and I'll begin in stillness. And when we take a breath, when we relax, when we ground, things just flow faster. Yet we are trained in our society to be automatic. What do I mean by that? I mean by the relentless calendar invites, the no time for being. Yet the business research and also the research on mindfulness shows us when we take a break and begin in stillness, we begin in mindfulness, we begin in center, we're actually more productive and we're more creative, and it's more fun. So it involves taking a risk, though, of stepping off of the train of normal. So are we willing to lean into that discomfort and saying, hey, everybody, let's stop. Let's do a grounding before we move ahead with the agenda. And when I first did this in the early 2000s, like I do it, I presented to one of the largest banks in the world, and I got up there and I just started to sweat. And I was beet red, and I was like, I'm like, I can't believe I'm going to do it, and yet I know it's right action. So I'm going to just begin in grounding, begin in mindfulness, and give people the research. And at first they were sitting like this, so I'm sitting with my arms crossed, so the listeners here, like totally unreceptive. We did it, and the entire field changed. So, like, how can we lean into as leaders? We can't change other people. We can change ourselves. So the invitation is to step into our own vision, step into our own healthy power, healthy love, healthy wisdom. And then that changes the entire edifice of what's around us. It can't help but to be so. Yet so often there's this illusion of we're going to change the other. No, let's begin with ourselves. Let's lean into our discomfort. Let's talk about, relaxing our shoulders and play, because to me, it's also the future of corporations.
I can certainly see the win-win idea of being present and more productive slash profitable, right? That's the ideal, because that's fundamentally just speaking at an organizational level. If you said to a business, I have a way to make you more profitable, then the business, just the business consciousness, so to speak, says, yes, how can I be more profitable and successful? But if you said, oh, I can do that and actually make everyone's experience of working at the business better, then that also would seem like a win-win. So I'm curious, engaging at this level or at the umbrella of a business, which means potentially hierarchies or organizational structures, leaders, and how does this translate into then how do you cultivate that individual responsibility required that goes beyond just stepping into the office 9 to 5, so to speak? As you said, individuals are the ones who have to change and fundamentally. So how, in a sense, do you advocate for or see through, okay, we can do something in a meeting, but then how do you inspire, advocate for, or suggest people then do this on their own in their non-business hours?
Great question. So, do the two of you both have a personal aim? So, most people don't have a personal vision. So, it's like we're all ships at sea. Some people know which island they're going to, and other people don't. So, which way do we want? And life will blow us into different winds, right? So, how do we want to direct our boat? What is our inner compass and our North Star? So, for me, my personal vision is to evermore be a healthy muse, radiating love, wisdom, and healthy power in service to humanity and the planet. So my service orientation is the North Star, and the inner compass is this paying attention to what is healthy power, love, and wisdom, and what's being asked for in the moment. That's the muse part of it. So for everybody to get clear on what their personal intention is, or else we were our ships at sea, and we will be guided by other people's winds. And to stay true to what our being is wanting is very, very, very important. And that alignment of the being and the doing, very, very important. However, if we're not clear, and personal intention and aim can change over time. However, if we're not clear in the moment, it's very challenging. We are at the whims of so many other forces. So how do we stay in congruence with what it is that our hearts and bodies and minds most long for? That's the invitation with this. And as I said, everybody is a leader. And just some data for you on how important this is and why this is so important. We have 60,000 thoughts a day, 85% are repeating, 95% of those are negative. To change, to focus and put our intention really does matter. To have positive intention and have positive aim, it can open up portals in people's lives. However, to get people to stop and actually do it, I love working with teams and doing this because it ignites everybody. Like, do the work. And people get uncomfortable with it because I think it's because of this automaticity. Like, we're on this train, but how do we stop and reflect and consider who it is we really want to be and what's being called for in our lives?
You mentioned Patagonia at the beginning there as an example, at least of a company that got on board with your principles and desired to share this. I wonder if you could share some examples of other companies or include Patagonia where this has been successfully implemented, these awakened practices, and the impact that the employees particularly have experienced. I'm always interested in hearing about leadership, but particularly where people are in a position where they are employed by, and you spoke to this beautifully in this. There's a fine line between fulfilling somebody else's desires and employment and employees. That there's something very subtle there. So I'd love to hear about the impact that's had on employees and their ability to align to their personal endeavors as opposed to just solely to leadership's endeavors.
This is a great question, and it gets back to hiring too. I think it's very important that people hire and people who are being employed have alignment around vision and values. When we don't have alignment, that's not a good recipe. The stew is not quite, it doesn't work very well because it's like a rub every day you go to work, and we don't want that, right? So alignment of values is very, very important. So one service organization we were working with, they measured wanted and unwanted turnover. And so by employing these practices, their unwanted turnover went down. So in other words, people were staying longer. But I invite every leader on this call to think about how would you measure your culture? Because this is what you're tapping into here. So our clients choose what they're going to measure culture on. And I don't believe in kind of a one size fits all for corporate culture. No, it's not an equation. This is more mercurial. This is way, way, way more mercurial. Another client we are working with, a renewable energy company, they measured the different aspects of the 9 different Enneagram types, and where they didn't have very much of one energy, they then put in practices to reinforce. It was the Enneagram type 4 and 5, which is the individualist and the investigator. They put in practices to increase that energy in their team. So they looked at the map for where is our team on this and how can we improve these different segments. So it's just really, when it comes to culture, our imagination is unlimited and our creativity is unlimited. It's just back to where do we want to focus as a community, and how do we see our organizations as organisms, not simply as a set of individuals, like taking on more of an organism role in the health of the organism.
That brings me to this word culture, Catherine, and this idea of fields of influence, right? And the culture is very much the summation, as I understand it, of all those individuals inputting, and therefore the experience and environment in which a person is either thriving or surviving in these scenarios. So What makes for a great culture? It's a hot buzzword. It was certainly around when I was back in the corporate world, right? We're going to have a great culture. You'd have your town halls once a month, to work on culture. But what's the boots on the ground experience of that? How do we get that into practical frameworks?
Great question. And I love the boots on ground because ultimately it's all about what are the smallest things we're doing as leaders. And people think it's an astronomical thing, but it's what are every day, what are the tiny micro things that we're doing? Okay, so we've talked about individual awakening. We've talked about kind of group. The glue for culture is relationships. It is, if you have a positive relationship with your boss, you will more likely stay way longer. You'll be effectively more committed. You'll find it more enjoyable, more fun. So we don't put enough attention. The town hall is the group. Yet when I looked at I did a research study of about 1,000 leaders. Their bias was toward group or individual and least towards one-on-one relationships. And one-on-one relationships and healthy one-on-one relationships is where the rubber meets the road. So for example, there was a CEO I was working with, and when you entered his office, all you could see was a wall of books. I'm like, ooh, we need to do some work here. So he made a commitment to take one person out for lunch and ask one personal question, and that transformed his team. So it's like, what are the smallest things we can do to see another, to compliment another, to empower another? And that is where culture actually is formed, to live and embody the values. However, what we're talking about right now, again, the majority of leaders, when I ask, what's your vision, what's your values, I hear different stories from around the table. So unless we have that North Star, that clarity of vision, and it's interesting, it's not hard to do. Yet, can we take the time? Can we sit back and reflect enough on the values, on the glue that holds us together?
You started off by explaining a moment of inspiration to write the book. What about before that? What was your experience that brought you into being a person who was in business or in corporate world, but also had some pulse on consciousness practices, etc.?
I moved every 2 years of my life growing up, and I think moving really teaches people about other people and what's important and the importance of community. And I've never seen anything as separate. So, for example, just this morning, I was meeting with the CEO and we ended up speaking about the Bible. Well, like we're spiritual beings, and we're spiritual beings at work and under development. I took a sociology degree and then I have an MBA, and then I'm a trained yogi, and then I studied the Enneagram. So, and I don't see any of it as separate. And the root of that is probably my parents. Um, I think, our leadership begins with our parents. I think everybody's parents are their first leaders. And my mom and my dad were great. They were always, I was given books before anything else and reaffirmed for kind of reading and investigating things, and also not seeing life as separate. I also, I think it's very, very important that everybody sees organizations as forces for good. And I think that was probably just seeing the amazing things that organizations can do for community. And I'm involved right now in a number of not-for-profits, and there's not a different, I think that line between social organization, not-for-profit, and for-profit is becoming very blurred, because I think every organization must be a social community. And I was raised with my parents giving back to community and being involved in community was very important, because where else do we find meaning and belonging other than community? Like in that, just having that, we're all mirrors and webs for each other. We can't exist without the other. So your healing is my healing is your healing. And then and organizations are places of healing because it's where we spend the majority of our time. My mother's a teacher, you can tell. Those are probably right from her lips. So, and then how do we honor, I think right now we're at a very interesting time in humanity. How do we heal the past for the future? And it's the very important work that you do that is needed, because in 1 ounce of healing, it heals so many other things. And how can we all be the medicine that the world needs right now? That's the invitation for everybody listening. We are all the medicine. Can we sense it? Can we just do small little things to help humanity and the planet at this very, very important time?
It's interesting you speak of the blurred boundaries, Catherine, because it brings to mind this idea that we're slowly breaking down the divisions, and maybe the whole great pause of COVID was part of this, in terms of a lot of organizations having people functioning from their home environments for extended periods rather than within their office environments. But this idea of the boundary between personal life and work life, which certainly when I grew up in the 80s and my parents were first, in their heights of their careers, this was a very firm footing, right? You had your personal life and you had your work life, and very rarely did the two intertwine, right? You're not taking your personal life into your work life. That's unprofessional. I'm seeing, at least from clients that we're interacting with and people who are coming to do the work, right, to experience healing, to bring more balance and harmony to their lives, that they're seeking more and more equilibrium, or at least truth and authenticity between these, what were apparently segmented aspects of their lives that operated in a silo, right? My work persona, my personal persona. And I believe what you're speaking to here is really part of that movement, in terms of how do we be our authentic self, regardless of our environment, regardless of whether we're in our professional role or our social roles, and how do we bring more authenticity, truth, holism to all that we're doing.
I love the way you just described it, and I really do see life as music and life as integration. And what is the harmony that's asking to be sung right now? And can we pay attention to the harmony that's asking to be sung and to stay in alignment? I do believe in boundaries. It's very, very important to have boundaries. And I have never worked in a traditional way. I'm a mother of 2 boys, built organizations while having 2 boys, wrote a book. So it's how do we tune into the heartbeat of the universe and the heartbeat of ourselves, so that we can stay in an alignment with what is most being asked for. However, are we also listening to that music and not beating a drum that's not meant to be played at the moment? It's a very again, back to that self-awareness and that inner attunement, that inner melody. Do we know our inner melody? And I have many stories of CEOs in parking lots crying because they've lost their way. They've lost their heart. They've become human doers, not human beings at work. No, it's the time for harmony, for integration, and for a different tone to be sung that's in alignment with the universe.
Somebody's listening to this and they work in a supermarket, or they're a lawyer at a traditional law firm, and these principles that you're describing so eloquently have not yet reached their organization. What is it that they can do? How is it that they can practically start to bring some of these principles to their workplace?
And create a personal aim, know your Enneagram, become self-aware. Every time you walk through a door, repeat it to yourself. So instead of those other mantras that I was speaking of, those negative words, replace it with personal aim. Every time you go through a door, every time you go through a meeting, think about how you can elevate somebody in that meeting, how you can be a positive force, how you can positively notice another human being. And if you are a leader, to cultivate vision, values, connectedness, proper structure, peace, creativity, and give people freedom to be who they are. So there's many, and ultimately, though, it's every day. What is the tiniest thing you can do in the moment to be of service?
You've referenced the Enneagram a number of times. I'm not that familiar with the Enneagram outside of Gurdjieff's work. I'm curious if you would describe what the Enneagram is to listeners and how you implement it in your practice.
The Enneagram is a very ancient methodology, and Eckhart Tolle speaks of being present. And the Enneagram is the roadmap for how do we be present. It tells us what our strengths are, what our work-ons are. It's often a secret tool. It's a process map for how do we become more present. It shows what happens when we behave in default. It shows what happens when we're at our higher selves. It gives us a real roadmap, a real spiritual and practical leadership roadmap for how to be present. We have a ton of resources on our website and also on our YouTube. And it's one methodology to really improve your lives, and to improve lives, to improve impact, to improve your own harmony. And when we improve our own harmony, then we improve everybody else's harmony, because we're all singing music together.
You've mentioned values a couple of times, both personal and corporate. And I wonder if you could share how the role of purpose and values helps shape culture.
At Awaken Company, our values are triple P, which is playfulness. So, for example, tomorrow, again, the strategy session, I'll be bringing some very playful chocolates to begin the session. So, like, actually embodying the playfulness, purposefulness, being deliberate, and passion. It's because that's like my natural MO is passion, to actually to care about the world. And that's not often, people don't really care. So how do we instill that passion with everybody we work with? So, for example, Sherry, who I work with, she's constantly giving me little message of impact around what we do. And to me, that just fuels the passion of what we do. And there's been some companies who's actually had values awards, and this is a way of building culture. And what they've done is they have designed, again, chocolates coming up. I don't know why. They've designed chocolates around their values. And so the people are awarded for their values, for living the values. And then the person who's awarded has to choose who gets it next in terms of living the values. So these are like little practical things that elevate the energy in a company, in an organization, and reaffirms, the values. One of my colleagues, I've made so many mistakes when it comes to vision and values. However, and I'll tell you my vision mistake. It was an absolute leadership disaster. We're in the boardroom, and this was a while ago. And I'm like, okay, team, here's our vision. And I was like so excited and ignited about it. And everyone kind of nods their head like, yeah, okay, great, Kath. Okay, on we go. Plow through the agenda. Back to what we were speaking about earlier. And then we brought in a consultant from Denmark to work with us because nobody was doing in North America what we were doing. And he asked everybody, what's your vision? And nobody raised their hands. And so I cried myself to sleep that night because I realized what a poor job I had done in terms of leading. And one of Margaret Wheatley's core principles is people support what they create. And so we then redid the vision together, and nobody ever forgot the vision or the values of the organization. And one of my teammates made a huge popcorn jar, and on the ingredients were the values of the organization, with what percentage she felt that they were represented. So there's just, again, our creativity. And it's a simple little thing to create a popcorn jar with a sticker on it. It's not complicated, but it leaves an impact because it's unique.
I'm interested in the question of personal responsibility in this, right? Because there's a lot of talk about how we bring corporations, organizations, business leaders, models under responsibility for our health and happiness, right? So we attend a workplace and they're responsible for our health and happiness, right? Which is obviously not how it rolls, but I'm just trying to sort of flip it back as well to personal responsibility. And you mentioned healing and this idea that each individual's healing is contributing to the whole. And we understand that, of course, from our perspective of doing healing work with people, but how's that applying in a corporate business world sense?
Personal responsibility is very, very important. Once we define ourselves as a leader, then we've got to take responsibility for our leadership, and we've got to take responsibility for our being. And everything, back to what we were talking about earlier, is a matrix. So we pull on one piece of the spider web, another piece moves. So by somebody claiming their own personal power, personal responsibility, it actually serves the whole. By claiming our vision and how it aligns to the organization's vision, it actually helps the whole. The illusion is, though, that it doesn't. Personal responsibility is key around boundaries. And I've had to learn some personal hard lessons around that. Like, one of my things that I work on is I give my energy away. So I've really had to work on what are my boundaries around that, because when I do that, I end up getting burnt out, and that doesn't serve anybody. So it's taking responsibility for my own stuff. And then in me taking responsibility, it gives other people more freedom. And it also actually makes the whole system sing or hum more consistently. And it's not very empowering either when you give away your energy and people use it and use your ideas or what have you. It doesn't allow them space to come up with their own. So it's not really of service to them either. So what you speak of is very, very important. And that's why we must do our own development and our own healing work. Like, I'm a very strong proponent for what you do. Like, I have people support me in my work, and I use various tools. Like, I use astrology, I use tarot. I practice. I have a very devout Buddhist practice. And all of these methodologies help me to be more whole and are very important to me living in alignment with what I think I'm here to do.
By a person becoming more self-defined, boundaried, empowered, self-responsible, identifying themselves as leaders, etc., then all the different units can start to kind of collaborate from a place of centeredness. At least that's how I'm hearing this. And I really think that the message that you're imparting is really important, that organizations can be a force for good, that organizations overall can be a force for good. Seems like a very important thing, because we can do what we can as individuals, but fundamentally we realize we are in a world where business, corporations, money have tremendous amounts of power and influence and can be great forces for change, either good or bad. So what do you think is the future, or the leading edge of how this evolving landscape is in terms of seeing organizations as positive forces?
I think the future of organizations is emergent organisms, so that the organism is focused on service to solving a problem, either a humanitarian problem or a planetary problem. And in so doing, I feel like the field of organizations can become informants to solve those challenges in breakthrough ways. Because it's almost like another instinct or another sense will have been developed in these organizations because of their collective field. For those who don't believe in organizations, I believe organizations are the only way that we are going to solve our collective challenges. So how do we bring humanity back into our organizations to be this force field for service, for good? And that is of utmost importance at this time. And I also believe in using untraditional methodologies to help heal what has gone on in organizations and in society as a whole. I believe in humanity. It's like we're all being invited into a new way of being and doing. Are we willing to step in individually, step in our relationships, step into the collective? And it doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. No, it's like a learning organism. Are we learning? Are we developing? Are we cultivating healthy thoughts, healthy heart, healthy body in how we are at work and how we are in life, because we don't get our moments back. We do not get our moments back. And for future generations, it's time to kind of readjust the way society has been organized. Let's face it. Okay, the majority of people are disengaged at work. People rate the worst time of the day is the time with their bosses. Most organizations don't survive past 9 years. We are hitting our head against a wall again and again and again. It's time for something new. And it's the invitation to self-awareness, to mindfulness, to healthy relationships, healthy relatedness, to creating deliberate corporate cultures so that we have healthy forests, not forests that are going to wither away and die.
There's something very powerful you're sharing, Catherine, in the third party, and I'll use field dynamics as an example here because we're Keith and I are in a position of responsibility as co-founders of an organization, and it's in some ways in its infancy in terms of what we hope for it in its long-term ambitions. But we're very aware of that sense of custodianship, and that each and every person interacting and engaging with trainings, whether they then move on or remain an active part of the community of the organization, right, of the community, that is creating a collective field, a collective input, and recognizing the potency of these, I don't want to say group minds, but this group field, and how the sum total, it's exponential. It's more than the individuals contributing. And I'm very inspired by and hopeful for the vision of the future that you foresee or hope for, in terms of this becoming more of a working model, an approach for all types and sorts of organizations. And I think that the thing that I'm taking away primarily from what you've shared today is it's the holistic model that people are learning to apply to themselves as individuals, right? Mind, body, spirit. And it's applying that holism, it seems, to an organization.
Organizations have mind, body, spirit. This last Friday, I was presenting to a UN group and a grade 12 group, and the students got it like that. There was no convincing. They immediately got it. And then, so I know for upcoming generations, the field is already different. I think we're at a very exciting time in humanity's precipice, shall we say, in this very moment. We're at a very, very exciting time.
If people are interested in finding your work, find out your services, read your book, where would you generally direct them?
Please visit awakenedcompany.com, sign up for our newsletter. I really look at making our newsletter super, super practical. So my latest one's been on how to hire from a conscious perspective. So super, super practical. We're on all the social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And again, the certification I'm really, really excited about, and check out our video on demand. We've got so many services to help people awaken individually in their relationships and as teams. And I love working with teams. So awakencompany.com is the best resource. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Catherine, for sharing. We'll be sure to include that in the show notes. And thank you for sharing your wisdom today and your voice of expertise as a pioneer in the evolution of conscious business practices. It's been really fascinating to learn more.
Such an honor and privilege to be with both of you. And I also believe in thanking the invisible. So thank you to the invisible that helped bring us together, and to everybody listening too.
Thanks for listening to the episode. What really supports the podcast is providing a rating and review of the show on your preferred listening platform. This helps us get the message out to a wider audience. If the topics we discussed today appeal to you, do take a moment to subscribe. Lastly, we invite you to check out our website, fielddynamicshealing.com, to learn about our training programs, private session work, and to see how we're setting the standard in contemporary energy healing. Many thanks, and see you next time.